Hola, buenos días a todos, ¿cómo están? Un gusto tenerlos conectados. Tenemos más de 80 estudiantes de CEDIM y tenemos a Giulia Bedoni desde Milano acompañándonos. Muchas gracias a Jaciel y a Diana por coordinar esta reunión. Estamos muy felices de estar acá el día de hoy. Antes de empezar, les voy a mostrar un videito del Welcome Back to School y luego le doy la palabra a Giulia para que empiece su presentación. Vamos a ver que el video y el audio funcionen bien. Entonces, me avisan si está ok.
We're back, let's do it, let's celebrate. So, we are back. We are very happy that we are back.
Oh, it's amazing. Finally, we get to see people, we get to see the teachers.
It's been really nice seeing the students. It's been really lovely seeing them and looking at all the different hairstyles that everyone's got now. These kind of home haircuts are really interesting. It's really nice to be back in the building. It's like coming back home.
There are classes happening, tutors giving students tutorials, there are students in the library, there are students in the design labs, there's a virtual reality lab. Best of all, there's our brilliant fittings, where we've got an industry panel that are judging with the students. So it really does feel like a creative community.
The school is being super safe. We've been testing twice a week, every week.
There's the thermoscan as you come through the door. You're supposed to wear a mask in all the public spaces.
Everybody signs a code of conduct. Every student, every visitor, every tutor, every member of staff.
My parents do feel comfortable knowing that the school is handling the situation very well, knowing that we're getting tested, everyone has a negative test to enter the campus, everything's being sanitized, so they do feel very comfortable that I'm being well taken care of.
We also have international SOS, medical support, travel support, and psychological support.
So it was very easy from abroad to know when I'm able to come back.
It makes me more comfortable. I know how everything works here. I know the designer students that I can collaborate with. Everyone is helping each other, and I think that's beautiful.
So all of that aspect about when to travel, how to get from the airport back to their accommodation, and when to move from their accommodation into school are steps that we take with our team every day.
If you're thinking of coming to the UK, I definitely think you should do it because there's so many opportunities here that you wouldn't have if you're doing it online. I mean, last year, for example, with me being in London, I had the opportunity to do an internship at Marcus Almeida, which I learned a lot from. And then my other internship I did at Victoria Beckham, and I had the best time there.
Get back into the school so that you can have the university experience.
Get on the plane and come back to uni because it's amazing. There is no place like uni, especially Marangoni.
Please feel free to come back and feel comfortable again in this amazing creative building.
Muy bien, este era el video de Welcome Back. Como saben, Instituto Marangoni tiene diferentes sedes en Italia, en Francia, en el Reino Unido y en Asia. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, le doy la palabra a Giulia. Giulia, grazie per oggi. You go.
Thank you for having me, guys, and thank you for joining this lecture. I'm connecting from Milano, so I'm here. Here is late afternoon already. So I've been teaching now in Istituto Marangoni since more than 10 years. And before that, I was even now working as a fashion designer for different companies. The one I worked for a longer time was Prada, in particular, Miu Women's Wear. So what I want to share with you guys today, I will share my presentation, is the process of developing a fashion collection, in particular, with a focus on the contamination between the past and present and how we actually coordinate a fashion collection. Because we really believe, and this comes from our experience, even my personal one, for instance, working in these fashion brands here, that a lot from the past fashion history is still used to develop contemporary and future fashion collection. So what I will share with you is the way this process happened from exactly what we learn working in a style office in a company, for instance, as Prada in my case. That's how usually we also teach to our students in our fashion design course, not just in Milan, but of course all around the world. So let's start. So this is, for example, a collection from Prada, of course. So what I want to share with you is this, how we actually develop a collection that is working, let's say, in terms of message, idea, atmosphere, shape, proportion, coordination, merchandise mix. As you know, it comes after many steps. You don't do a collection in just one day. Of course, there are many steps. And it's, of course, a creative work. But at the same time, this creative work is based on a very practical aspect, that is the timing, the data we have to analyze, our practical skill. So at the end, it's also a lot of work made on the processing this data, not just the creative part. So learning how to process information and how to apply them in a correct way is also part of a successful collection result, not just the creative part. So the role of the fashion designer nowadays is more and more involved in different, let's say, disciplines. So not just the creative part. Here I listed, let's say, the most important, in my opinion, characteristic that you should have if you want to be a fashion designer, not just a designer, but in particular for our work. We should be always curious, of course, because as you know, we do many collections a year. We never do something we done already the day before. We tend to change every time our idea in our mind. So the only way is to keep searching, keep learning, keep exploring. So curiosity, first of all, together with imagination, because we also have to imagine possible future development of this. We always work at least 1 year in advance. So we have to imagine what could be fashion in 1 year on, not just tomorrow. So this could be quite complicated sometimes to figure out, even if we have, of course, information to imagine that. Versatility means that we try to learn as students first, and then when we go to work, possibly to be a bit flexible in order to expand also our skills and knowledge, in order to have more chances to work, for instance, for different kind of companies, because you may have in your mind the company of your dream, but then you may have a job offer from a company that was not, of course, close to your style. So possibly if you develop a sort of elasticity, let's say, in your skill and your aesthetic, you have more chances to work for more companies, of course. Let's say to be creative is a challenge to put your creativity into a functional product. So at the end, depending on the brief you get and the taste and the DNA of the company, it should be possible to address your creativity in different ways. So of course, probably not everything is possible, but we try to do that. Discipline. So as many creative work, not just a fashion designer, creativity has to be together with the discipline. You have to manage your time, you have to be very organized, you have to respect deadlines. So sometimes people think that to work in fashion, it's something just crazy and funny, but it's also like that, but not just like that. Without discipline and be very organized, it's impossible to face the amount of work and the deadline you have to respect all the time. So you also have to try to learn to be organized and to manage the workloads. We are never satisfied about what we do. Once we do a collection, we will already start with the next one because we look at our work and we think it's already too old. So we tend to keep change, cancel what we do, and really to create a fashion show, probably we produce 5 times more of idea to select the best ones and really then show what we want to show, because we are never satisfied with the first thing and we have to verify our ideas many times. So technical knowledge, what we draw the most of the time should be produced, should be watched, should be developed in terms of sizes. Sometimes for the fashion shows, we may have the chance to do something more creative, more experimental. when that is a show moment, but then usually for the collections and the productions, we also have to go back to this technical part. So it's like you have to build up something like a building. You start learning the basis and learn how to do the structure, and then you put the other elements. Otherwise, of course, you will do something that is not probably working from the technical point of view. It's a very challenging environment, as you maybe know. So also to face this, it's good to be, let's say, to have a touch of craziness. Otherwise, it could be, let's say, quite heavy. So in fashion system, working anyway in this field, you can meet many different people. It's very interesting also from this aspect. Really can be very, very nice to have this exchange with people from all over the world, from different backgrounds. And this exchange is really important for us to keep and to maintain creativity and to have new ideas as well. And possibly to do this kind of job, you need a big culture. That is something that you develop year after year. It's like a never-ending learning. So we really have to study past fashion history to understand present fashion and to imagine what could be future fashion. So also in our school, of course, we dedicate a lot of time in studying fashion history. But what I want to show you today is actually how we use fashion history to develop a contemporary fashion collection. Because if we use it too much as it is, of course, we do something that looks like costume, and it's not what we usually want to do. So there are some tricks that we apply to the way of developing a contemporary fashion collection, taking inspiration from the past. And I put this as last, but it's probably one of the most important things, in my opinion. As for many creative work, what is creativity about? Creativity is also about putting things in relationship, connecting ideas. So if you develop knowledge about fashion, art, design, movies, whatever can give you, again, ideas and food for your thoughts, that's nothing if you don't have developed the skill to putting these ideas in relationship. So to mix, and the keywords, let's say, for us is to contaminate. So to mix different things together into one third product. So maybe mixing different things can give you some chances to do something completely new. And we're gonna see later how. I want to share with you also how usually it's organized a style office in a company. In this particular case, this example is how Miu Miu Women's Wear was organized when I was working in Prada. Just to show you that usually, especially in big companies, there's not just one person doing everything, of course, but it's a group of people. So also you have to learn how to work in a teamwork and how to make your design to look good together with your co-worker design. So let's say if you look at the central part, the designers, we were divided in 3 groups, basically. I was designing, for instance, what was called the lightweights. So dresses, tops, shirts, and skirts, everything that usually is made with a lighter material. On the other side, there was a colleague of mine drawing the heavyweights, so coats, jackets, trousers, and also leather and fur items. So me and him, we had to do together the collection, basically. My dresses and tops has to look good with these coats, for example, and trousers and so on. In between, there was a couple of person also drawing jersey and knitwear, because that is a completely different thing. On top of us, there was a coordinator or senior designer. We were junior at that time. In our company, there were actually more than one coordinator. In one time there was one, then for other years there were 2, so depends. It's not just necessarily only one. On top of that, you have other layers. In our case, there was another coordinator that was the head designer, and on top of everything, there was Miuccia Prada, so the property, the head of the company, basically. Then imagine that this was Miu Miu, that is a smaller office. If you go to Prada Women's Wear, that was another floor, basically, than where we were. There were even more people, because there was, for instance, one person just for trousers, one just for shirts. And this may change from one company to the other. There are companies in which there is someone that just make, for instance, draped dresses. In smaller companies, of course, you may have to do instead more. So it really depends. But in any case, in any company you go, it's very rare that there is one person doing everything because it's too much work to do. So they tend to organize and divide you by categories, as in this case. More and more designers, we have to deal with other departments, of course, like sales and marketing departments. We have to understand what's selling more or less, what some markets, imagine Asian market rather than European or American or South American market, whatever market we are selling, especially if we are working for such a big company with shops all over the world and also shops in both hemispheres. So in a time of the year on a part of the world is summer and at the same time is winter in another part. So this helps you to understand how many pieces you have to develop, how many, the cost of the garments you have to sketch and do, and the shapes that are selling more or less. So all these informations are helping you to sketch and develop collection that should be correct for the market we are going to produce for. And together with us, there was a production coordinator, product coordinator, so a person to which we were basically giving the drawing. We were sketching, putting all our notes and informations next to the sketches, giving the sketches to this person who was completing the chart, let's say, with all specification about fabrics, color, codes, and everything like that. And together with the pattern maker and tailors, we were discussing how to make these garments. So we were doing first a prototype in calico, and then after a different fitting section in order to adjust our clothes, we were finally having a product that was probably the one we want to keep. So this, just to give you an idea that a style office in a fashion company is made by, of course, many people. So another thing that is not easy to learn and put into practice, but you practice it, of course, more when you actually go to work, is this, that you probably gonna develop just one part of the collection, and this part has to go well with your colleague part. So it's never just about one person. So, but where actually the inspirations of the collection are coming from? How we can find ideas and make sure that our next projects and collection are actually the correct one for the next season. Of course, first of all, you, as not just for fashion design, you can take inspiration basically from everywhere. So social network, of course, but history of fashion, architecture, street style, new technologies, whatever really can be source of inspiration. Here, I've just put some examples. Many people nowadays use, of course, internet mostly, but believe me that especially big companies as Gucci, Prada, Balenciaga, of course, they have a big archive in their companies, both of books and magazines as clothes. For instance, imagine that in Prada, they have an underground layer where they have books and magazines about any kind of topic, about any year and era. It's like a huge library where you can really find whatever you need. And they keep buying new books every month. The new ones also being produced, so they are always updated. So you don't really need to use internet much. And in some moment, it was also forbidden, imagine, to use internet. You can be sure that they're not using Pinterest, for example, but really using their internal books library to do research, because on books, you can still find photos and images that are not on the internet, for instance, as the archives of their clothes, because they may use previous patterns, previous shapes, previous collections to get ideas to produce the new ones, for instance. This is something very, very common in fashion companies. So everything can give you, of course, a source of inspiration, but you have to know that especially here in Italy and probably in Paris too, fashion designers and fashion companies, probably the 95% of time are taking inspiration from past fashion history, especially the 20th century. So last century, Here I just have put some examples. And in fact, this is also what we study, because it's very important to be able to develop this. It's like you learn a new language when you learn fashion. When you learn this new language, you watch fashion shows and you can actually recognize the references, the shapes, where these shapes are coming from, because you have to imagine that in fashion history, also all shapes has been done in terms of patterns, in terms of really construction. So it's almost impossible that if you look at a fashion show, the shapes you see, I'm talking just about the shapes and construction, are not coming from something happened in the past. And it's very challenging and also interesting and funny sometimes to try to guess which references are coming from. Sometimes the designers already themselves, they share this with the press and they say, this collection is inspired by, I don't know, the 30s Hollywood glamour, mix it with something else. Sometimes they don't really say that, so you have to guess. But if you have a good history of fashion knowledge, you can really, really recognize everything. And what is funny to see is that what I will show you in a while is that fashion designers they tend to mix up different periods. So this is very fun in order to do something new, something fresher. Some designers prefer to be more literal. Some designers prefer to experiment a bit more. Look that not all designers, of course, use references from the past, but most of them, they do, especially again here in Europe. If you think about Miuccia Prada, for instance, she really prefers to use what we call retro fashion. That means fashion from the beginning of this century till the 60s. You can always find in their collections references of the 50s, the 60s, the 40s, something like that, because she really likes those times in fashion. But if you think about Alessandro Michele in Gucci, probably you find more about the 70s, or you find more about the 80s, for instance. Or some designers are now again back to the 90s or the 2000s, because it's a time in fashion that is now very, very contemporary. But you may find that the 90s and the minimalism in fashion was anyway connected to the 60s, that is another minimal era, and the 20s, that is also considered a minimal era. But why designers use so much past fashion history to develop new collections? For different reasons. One, as I told you before, is because really in the past we have so many patterns and shapes and constructions references that is very common to use the basics from the past and then re-elaborate into something more contemporary, more wearable, more correct for today. Another reason is that speed of fashion is now so fast compared to the past that you have to develop a new collection in such a short time that it's easier to take ideas from the past and interpret in a new way rather than imagine something that doesn't exist anymore, that is very, very complicated. And sometimes you don't really have time to do that in terms also of experimentation, especially when you're in a company. And the other thing is that anyway, fashion is a cycle, it keeps coming back. And after the 70s, here with especially Saint Laurent, we have what is called new retro. That means that from the 70s, already designers as Saint Laurent started to use fashion from previous time. For example, Saint Laurent was using a lot fashion from the 40s because it was, in his opinion, interesting to reinterpret the 40s in the 70s way. Or the 80s, for instance, are very connected to the 30s. 30s Hollywood glam was used a lot in the 80s. So there are some parallel in fashion, and from the 70s going on with the rise of ready-to-wear, so pret-à-porter, so something faster, ready for the use, the designer started to change fashion completely from something more like couture, something more made on measure, to something again faster, in a faster production. So using fashion from the past, it's easier to speed up the rhythm of fashion development. So these are the reasons, basically. So it's a sort of what we call nostalgia, a nostalgic feeling about the past. Many of us designers, as also our students, have a sort of nostalgia about the past. It's like if you like fashion history, especially costumes, you imagine how it was to live, I don't know, in the 60s, in the 50s, in the past times. You really want to imagine and explore and read the costume, because it's also linked to our society, how we're used, how people were used to live. If you're passionate about history, something super interesting. And it's interesting again to see how some of these things could be reinterpreted nowadays. It's something really enjoyable and funny also to test and try. So it's a sort again of nostalgic feeling we keep having. So this is an example that is on Diet Prada, for instance, that for sure you know as an Instagram page is often showing connection between past and present collection, about what I was telling you before about the archives. So using companies' archives, especially if you have or you work in a company, as in this case, this was Balenciaga, using something from your past company to do something new, it's possible to take ideas for some volumes, to play with some embroideries. Already here you can see that some shapes made in the 60s, in this case, were done in a way that is, of course, more cool, more contemporary, more fresh, in some cases a bit more sporty, because they try to do it in a fresher and contemporary way. So very often companies like these, even Dior does this a lot, Fendi, all these companies with a long history and heritage, they have the chance really to literally open the archives, take ideas, put them on a model or on a mannequin and try to make them in a new way. So this is very, very common. As this is another example, this works, of course, not just for clothes, also for accessory. Sometimes, we don't know if the inspiration is a sort of homage, or is a sort of stealing, or is a sort of what, because it depends if the designer is open to share this or not. So you understand if it's actually made on purpose, or if it was a case, not a case, but something that happened they didn't want to say. So if you are working in fashion, especially, it's very nice to understand when you look at a fashion show and you look, for instance, at these accessories, that something in your mind is happening. Say, I already have seen this. Maybe let me check Romeo Gigli fashion shows in the 90s, because I remember something very similar. So, of course, without this knowledge, you cannot find out where you saw that. So how we remember this? Of course, watching all fashion shows from all brands, from the first one to the last one. That, of course, takes a lot of time, but it's possible. And we have to keep doing that to keep ourselves, of course, updated. So this, again, to tell you that it's very common for many brands to take ideas from the past. But how we actually use these ideas. So I want to share you some examples about the actual use, how we put into practice, let's say, the use of the past. This is a collection from Prada. It was a Spring-Summer 13 collection. Here you can see some pictures from the fashion show, in which Miuccia Prada mixed different topics, actually. So the first topic she took was this other collection from Courrèges, that is a designer from the 60s. So as I said before, of course, the 60s are quite clean time. It's one of the period in time called minimal because of the clean shapes. Also called childish because shapes were close to kids wear for proportions, big collars, big buttons, lengths, short lengths, trapeze shape. So something that Miuccia Prada really likes. She often takes ideas from the 60s, but this time she took in particular this collection from Courrèges in 67. Courrèges himself in those years took inspiration from these flowers that made Andy Warhol in the 64. It was pop art print he made in many options, but he took in particular the red, black and white one. So Miuccia took all these things, the cleanness of the 60s, these flowers, the idea of the fur. Imagine this was a spring-summer collection, but she anyway decided to put fur in a spring-summer one. And this is what she said during the interview before her show, in which she also talks about nostalgia, as I told you before. She always feels nostalgic about the past, but in a way that push her to do something anyway good and contemporary for nowadays, because she also is very passionate about art, for instance, about movies. She's really in touch with many contemporary artists. So this push her creativity in a way that is not just about fashion, but usually helps her to visualize what could be a good mix of things. So in this case, she was already mixing, let's say, something from past fashion history and art. But not just that, because if you look at some of these pictures, especially the white dress in the center with the two flowers here, you can notice some elements that are not necessary from the 60s, some materials as this thick silk that also is not necessarily typical from that time, as these shoes, for example. So what she did was to mix these topics, the 60s and the pop art from Andy Warhol, with something else that I will show you here. So again, on the right, you have some pictures from Courrèges in the 60s. She deconstructed and cleaned up a bit in order to make these shapes more fresh. On the left, you can see the other inspiration that was Japan and some traditional clothes from Far East, but again, in particular, she picked Japan. Kimono, the thick silk, some color palette. So the flowers became not just flat as in the 60s, but also something close to the folding, so origami. In fact, if you also look at the fabrics, as you probably know, in Japan, as in some Far East fashion history, traditional fashion, it's different than our way of imagining the clothes. We tend to cut and sew, apply, darts, zippers, buttons, and these elements. In Japan, they tend to fold instead. They don't necessarily cut. So they have another approach, another technique. And what she tried to do, she mixed it up. So she mixed Japanese fashion with the 60s, with the pop art. Because, again, there are some designers, and she's one of these, who really like to mix up different topics. So in one collection, not necessarily have to put just one idea, one topic. You can really mix up 2, 3, 4, as many as you want. Imagine that Alessandro Michele in Gucci can mix it up many topics in one collection, as another designer that is very able doing that is John Galliano, for example. He was used, especially when he was working in Dior in the 2000s, to mix at least 4 or 5 topics in one collection. So good designers usually can mix these things, obtaining a final result that doesn't look as something forced or pushed together. It really goes well together. It looks balanced. It looks fluid. It means that you did a good job in balancing these very different elements. Sometimes it's also a matter of putting elements in contrast, something that no one ever put together, and see what happens. So that's a chance, as I told you at the beginning, these keywords, that is contamination, to maybe obtain something new. Maybe no one before ever mixed up this Courrèges collection with Japan, for instance. Maybe I can try and see what happens. So this is something that many designers usually do. So this is, again, a close-up of the flowers and the fur. As you can see, it was very similar to the initial idea. And basically, she did the same for the accessories, because, of course, you can do the same for accessories too. So what she did was to pick the famous space age boots of the 60s, because in the 60s, there was this big trend of the space age. People wanted to go to the space to explore moon. So in fashion as well, there was a lot of references to astronaut and space. So she took the 60s space age boots, and she mixed these boots with the Japanese tabi boots, and something also more close, not to tradition, but to streetwear. So to these famous Harajuku girls, something from streetwear in Tokyo. So with this decoration, these flowers and colors, and she mixed it up all together. So she put the silver color, the socks from the tabby boots, the big platform, the decorations in one product. So again, this is what we call contamination. Contaminate and mix up different ideas and get maybe one result that possibly looks quite new, that no one else did before. Of course, you could still recognize the references if you know where to look, where to look. If you, let's say, just pick one idea, like if you just take Japan, for instance, the risk to do something that is too close to the original idea, it's too high. As if you take just something from the past fashion history, the risk to do something that looks like vintage fashion is also too high, because maybe you just copy or reproduce something in a too similar way. This is another example. This is a collection from Miu Miu instead, which in this collection she also mixes different things. One of these was an inspiration from the 20s, so the flapper girl from the 20s. But if you see on the left the result, what did she do? First of all, she deconstructed a bit the proportion into something more loose, more comfortable, so more contemporary. She used a material, this was silk called file, that she really likes. She often used this material because it looks technical. It almost looks like nylon. So in order to have something that doesn't look too, elegant, she decided to use this material and to leave it a bit undone. So on the edges, some edges were roughly finished. And also she put the dress in the heat at the end to give this wrinkles effect in order to look again not too perfect, But if you see the decoration, the bias cut and this motif on the waist, the process of reproducing this was really to simplify, deconstruct, move the elements, play with the proportions. So maybe more boxy, maybe a bit shorter, maybe the decoration could be a bit bigger. So to obtain this, you have to imagine that you try many, many sketches, you try many options. Some of these are tried into a prototype, and many prototypes are cancelled to arrive to keep this one that is probably the best one of all what you have tried. So you don't obtain this in just one sketch, of course. And then also the styling, the hairstyle, the earrings and the socks and the shoes are not necessarily coming from the same reference. In this case, socks are coming from the 60s childish inspiration, as the shoes have a bigger platform. In the 20s, there were not these shoes. So again, you can mix it up. Once you take an inspiration, no one is forcing you to keep everything as it was. It's a very interesting process. This is another example. Because in the same collection, she took again many pictures from the 20s, where you can see again this feeling of something undone, no lining inside, rough finishing, piece of fabric that looks draped on the mannequin, not necessarily finished to be stitched. Again, the size, she played with these big flowers, so the decoration, instead of being smaller, they became sometimes really huge. And clothes also were more naked. So in the past, they were starting to have more shorter skirts and the shoulders out. And she decided to emphasize this even more, having, for example, sometimes the back completely naked. So you decide how to play with these references. Look at the styling. This on the left was one of the most famous icons of the 20s. In France in particular, she was a famous actress. That was inspiration for her for the styling, for example, of the hairstyle. But if you check the picture, the flowers is replaced with a huge black flower. The stones and the beads are something very typical of Miu Miu. So she applied something that is in the DNA of the brand, together with the inspiration. And the print is a print of bananas and flowers that is also quite typical of Prada and Miu Miu, that was not necessarily existing in the 20s. But doesn't matter, again, you can really do whatever you want with these references. So it's very interesting to see how the past can be contemporary, still contemporary. And this more naked aspect I was mentioning before comes from the fact that in the 20s, because of the new shape of the dresses that were more short, and they were made for dancing, lingerie and underwear were becoming more and more visible and popular. So she decided to also show underwear, the bras and the legs, for instance, having super short tops and very deep V-neck, again, as a sort of reference to the past fashion history. So in the same collection, she also took the idea of menswear that was very common in that time, because women started to experiment and dress as men to gain more, let's say, power in the society. There were the first feminists trying to work and be more respected. So at the beginning, they were thinking to dress as men to get the respect. So menswear also was very important. This was the typical La Garçon in France. So she also decided to take blazers, men fabrics, suits, something to remember that what happened again in the 20s. So if you think about it, she's already mixing different things in this collection, the 20s, but not just the flapper girl. She's taking the flapper girl, she's taking the underwear concept, she's taking the menswear concept. And what else? The 60s, as I told you before, the socks were not coming from the 20s. So she also mixed it up with this childish look typical of the 60s. For these coats and accessories, so big coats, big buttons, big collar, stiff shapes, again, this kind of bon-ton feeling is actually a reference from the 60s, because as I told you at the beginning, Miuccia Prada is a fan of retro fashion, so she tends to take often references from those years for her inspirations. And this is just another example. This is always in the same collection. Again, the 60 references, this pink color, the big buttons and the big collars, maybe shifted in a new material as this fake leather, and this black ribbon that also is quite typical of the 60s moved into an accessory, but then super massive glasses. So a mix of things in order to obtain something more contemporary. But the references, when you sketch, actually you have these pictures in front of you in order to get ideas. And then again, just to tell you that in one collection you can really put whatever you want, she also took something more, linked to something more contemporary as a manga cartoon as Sailor Moon, again in the same collection. And you would say, why she did that? Because she liked it, because she think it could be something cool to have in the collection. So as a designer, you can really decide to mix whatever you want and whatever you like, if you can make it work, of course. So it's an ongoing test and experimentation about things that possibly can go well together. This is instead another collection I wanted to show you. This was a Bottega Veneta collection in which, for example, you can recognize some shapes from the 40s. These are typical shapes from the 40s. So these big shoulders, this is called a shirt dress, a dress with a belt, usually. This kind of sleeves, you can have different colors, but the length is more or less this one. So the shape is typical from that time. Colors, no, because in the 40s there was Second World War and colors were quite sad, let's say, because there was no chance to buy fabric. So I want to show you. The reference is exactly this. So look at these decorations in these beads, the military feeling, the belts as an accessory, because in those years, not having the chance to personalize and change much the clothes, accessories were becoming more and more important. So again, once you see a collection in a runway, in your mind, knowing fashion history more and more, you should have a sort of click and remember, where did I see these kind of things? In the 40s. Imagine that sometimes it's not easy to understand where things are coming from, because again, they are a mix of elements that not necessarily are so recognizable. And that is also the funny part. So the 40s, this is another example. In the 40s, there were these patterns again, for example, and this is again a new collection. You can see, unfortunately, the photo is in black and white, but having the archives of the pattern of the past, you can also personalize with new color combination, maybe clean up some details, maybe clean up a bit the shape, but still the reference is what comes from the past. This is an example from Gucci instead. I don't know if you have ever heard about this dancer called Mata Hari. In this collection, Gucci mixed up many topics. One of these was this reference of Mata Hari, this dancer that was also probably a spy in those years in Europe, wearing these kind of things, this kind of jewelry, and this nudity was very present, this kind of oriental fabric as velvet. So Gucci made out of it a new kind of thing. And believe me that you can take inspiration from everything. This is in a collection from Prada again, in which, mixed with other things, she also took inspiration from the doctor uniforms. So there's no limit, let's say. Also the color blocking, the neckline is coming from that, the pockets. You can mix up with whatever you like. So just to conclude this part about the inspiration, I want to show you what happened when a brand takes inspiration from the past. That is, again, very common. In this case, we have an inspiration of Louis Vuitton from 2013. When Marc Jacobs was the designer, he took inspiration from the 60s, and in particular, this girl called Eddie Sedgwick, that was a girl in Andy Warhol factory, very iconic. She was often wearing black and white stripes. And in that year, Marc Jacobs, as other designers, used a lot of this reference of the 60s, the optical print, black and white, clean, 60 shapes. And if this was Louis Vuitton, this was, for example, his collection, Marc Jacobs, in which, again, you see a repetition of a similar topic. And here you have other brands and editorials in which you have other collection using that in the same year. That means that this was a big trend of using that particular time of fashion, the 60s, the optical and the clean shapes of those years, into many different brands and fashion shows. So what happened after that? When you have a big trend like this in fashion shows, also about the past fashion history, of course, you can find the same in the same season also taken by Zara. So when you go to Zara, for instance, and you see stripes or you see some motifs or you're seeing some shapes that, of course, are more simple, more clean up. So something that is not necessarily elaborated as the luxury brand design, you always have to remember that for sure is coming from something that a designer did in a more complex way. So even who is buying, of course, fast fashion, probably even if they don't know, or maybe they know, it depends, is buying actually one of the trend of the season, not necessarily knowing that. So again, just to tell you that past fashion history is used so much that it keeps coming and going in a way that even fast fashion is somehow using that, just because it's taking ideas from, again, the past fashion history. This is another example of a Bottega Veneta collection in 2014-15, who took inspiration from actually a Saint Laurent collection of the 60s on the left, and then Zara basically took it to do a collection the same for winter. So of course you see the simplification of the clothes. Of course, this dress was not expensive as this coat, but who is buying this dress in Zara probably doesn't know that the inspiration is coming from the 60s, Saint Laurent, and Bottega took it to do a new collection. So to conclude, let's say this, I want to show you the last part that is about the coordination of a collection, So when you have all this information, the inspiration, let's say the topic you want to develop, and you try to sketch and develop clothes in a way to get, let's say, a final result that is really expressing your topic and a mix maybe of things that you want to develop. The other important aspect is the coordination of your collection. It is very complicated to do. So a repetition of shapes, colors, motif, elements that reproduce the idea of this topic that you are developing. So what we also do is to analyze fashion shows. For example, this is a Valentino show, from outfit 1 till the last one, in which we try to understand which are actually the references, the historical references or other references inside the collection. Try to understand how the designer organized these ideas into moments or groups or occasion. For example, can I identify different moments in the collection, like day wear, evening wear, special moment, or it's more like in the same mood but with different stories inside. Every designer decides the approach to coordinate, because when you sketch the outfits, you don't decide which is outfit number 1, outfit number 2, and so on. You develop everything. When you have all the pieces, you decide to organize them and to do the styling part, so to decide which is the first, the second, and which will be the last. So what is interesting to do is to understand, first of all, these transitions. In this case, they started with everything in white, then they turn into something with these flashy colors, then they put the prints, these jungle prints, going darker, gradually darker, keeping the prints, a black moment in this part, and then the very special dresses at the end, so the final gowns at the end of the collection. So what we basically do is to break, if you see, this is what the collection, the brand proposed from outfit 1 till outfit 80. What we do is to cut them out and put them not by the correct order, but by group. So all the white outfits, all the black and white, or the black one, all the jungle print ones, and then maybe the color groups, so the orange, the pink, the green, and then the special decorated final outfits. So this helps you to understand how they probably organized the collection. They didn't keep the collection in this way when it came to present, but they decided to instead mix it up more, the outfits, in order to create more rhythm, more involvement also for who is looking. So this is also something we analyze and we try to understand together with when we work in a fashion company with the colleagues, which is the better way to present a collection. Should we keep the moments very separate? Should we mix up? Which are the transition? What should be the final part of the collection and the beginning? So everything is as much important, of course, as the topic to emphasize or not. And what Gucci does, Gucci makes collection of even 100 outfits. If you see, this is just an example here, even 119. And usually the feeling you have when you look at a Gucci collection is that every outfit is different from the previous and different from the next one. But if you look closer, as here, outfit 32, for example, and outfit 35, you have connections, you have similar topics developed maybe in different colors. Why they put them so far from each other? Because, again, they want to create a surprise effect. So every outfit looks unique because you don't have so many similar things before and after. Again, it's a choice. Every brand decides to have one or the other approach. There are different ways to coordinate a collection. Valentino is more classic. Gucci is more experimental in the styling part. Again, this just to tell you that together with the topic, the development, at the end, also the coordination of the collection may or emphasize your topic, make it more readable, or make it harder to understand because it's mixed up with many different things. When you look at a Gucci outfit, in one outfit, you may have different time from past fashion history mixed together as well. So it gets a bit harder to understand. So this, again, to tell you, and I hope it was, let's say, quite clear that especially in in here, many fashion designers use the past as a way to read the future of fashion, and not necessarily is a bad idea if you can do a good job, let's say, in mixing up this topic. So I can see that there are already some questions probably, so maybe we can switch to the Q&A. Cesar, what do you think?
Thank you, Giulia. Yes, this was very, very interesting. If you guys have any questions and would like to pick Giulia's brain, go ahead in the chat.
Please.
I was the one who was typing. So if you guys, we still have a couple of minutes, so it would be very interesting if you would like to ask something to Giulia, and she would be happy to answer.
I can see a question. I don't know. What do you think is the biggest challenge when developing a collection? Well, there are many challenges. Let's say when you work in a company, you're not alone, because especially from the business part, the money part, you have to do investment in things that hopefully will work. So that is for me the most scary part, probably. But the biggest challenge for me is to maintain probably your identity, a coherence with yourself, and manage all this information. So I try to maintain my identity, but at the same time, I have to respect the brand DNA. I have to respect maybe the sales, maybe the trend. So it's a challenge to put all these things together and still be, original, have good results, a good final collection. So it's something that, again, you don't do alone. You are not just one person doing everything. It's a teamwork, luckily. That's the strength of a company and a fashion project. But still, that is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge. How hard was to start working with a big brand? Well, it was very hard because when I started, I was super scared about everything. You can imagine the work environment, how to deal with my bosses and my colleagues. And you have to imagine that I was working in this big brand before smartphones, having smartphones, before social media. There was Facebook in those years, but that's it. So what was happening in a company was really secret. Let's say you didn't have any clue before going to work there, and very crazy things, let's say, can happen in a big company. Nowadays, maybe less, because again, people can record, people can take pictures, people have to be careful. But in those years, there were people, screaming all day long, launching things around the office. So as you imagine, have you seen in some movies, exactly like that. It was exactly like this. So
did you get any help from the career office, or it was you? Okay.
No, Marangoni gave me the interview. It was my last year in Marangoni before graduation. I had this interview in Prada, Miu Miu, and I had to pass 3 different interviews. One was a drawing test, 2 was a review of my portfolio, and 3rd was a meeting with the actual designer, the head designer of the group, the office, who asked me some questions. And then when I left the last meeting, they called me back saying, okay, you can start in a week. They gave me the opportunity to start first as a internship, and then after 3 months, I became an employee, basically. So yes. The school helped me.
Okay. There's another question. What are your favorite emerging brands?
Well, one of brand I really like is this one called Area, because I think it's very inspiring, very fresh, beautiful, and also I think it's a representation of what I really hope will be fashion from now on. So something more inclusive from all point of view, from body shapes to any kind of person, because in the past fashion was very elitario, how you say, like an elite thing. Only if you also imagine fashion from the past, for sizes and everything, was really something probably impossible for the most of people to, so something people were dream about, but not necessarily be inclusive at all. So luckily, things are changing, and I think fashion now and going on, I see also my students is more and more in that direction. Not necessarily all designers are understanding this, and some companies are trying to change. Sometimes it's just, for marketing, sometimes it's because they really believe so. But my hope is that with the exchange of generation, this will be more and more happening, so the idea of fashion as was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, of people screaming, bullying other people, doing crazy things in the office will be done. So this is my hope. And really fashion, I think, is something about, it's like a dream. You can dream about another place, you can dream about occasion, you can understand society through fashion. It's something that can really also help people to escape to other dimensions. So I think should help people to achieve that and not to keep you away from that. So I really hope more and more this is happening. And
design has for you something therapeutic?
For me, yes. Really, I would say the drawing process. I decided to become a designer because drawing is my favorite thing. When I was in high school, imagine I studied in a scientific high school, so I didn't know anything about fashion or drawing. But I kept drawing all the time because it was my favorite thing. And I was thinking to do, chemistry and laboratory. Maybe nowadays with the COVID, I was anyway working. But at that time, I didn't even know, because I come from a small hometown, that there were schools as Marangoni. And when I found it out on TV, because again, internet was not working much yet, I understood that it was possible to join my passion with an actual job as a fashion designer. So for me, drawing is really therapeutic because it puts me in a dimension that relaxes me, even if I'm doing it for work. But I could draw for, 12 hours in a row with no problem, because I really like to do that.
Awesome. What are you expecting from today at the Met Gala? Do you follow the Met Gala in Italy?
Yes, we do. Actually, I usually check one of my favorite profile on Instagram. Maybe you know that is called I Deserve Couture. That is very funny and also very good in giving interesting information. To be honest, I didn't have time to check anything yet. But tonight I want to see. I don't know what to expect. I hope to be, let's say, surprised. I don't know, really. I want to see. I don't have a particular expectation, to be honest.
What is your relationship with plastic arts?
Plastic arts? What do you mean? Let's say.
I guess, do you find inspiration from art in order to create your designs? I guess.
You see, let's say, we having the chance, hope now it's, I don't know there, but here is turning back to normality as before. So having the chance to visit exhibitions, art exhibitions are something that designers usually attend because, some people say that fashion is close to art, even if we do products, because we need to sell, we need to produce. So the approach is different, but we often take inspiration from art. And there are some famous collaboration between art and fashion designers through fashion history. So for us, it's a big source of inspiration, as music, of course, as movies and everything. And plastic art also because it's already three-dimensional. So working with mannequins, fabrics, it's something that we really love, as we love, most of us, painting, especially from the past, before photography. It's something to understand the costume of the past. Otherwise, we couldn't have any evidence, of that. So yes, absolutely. Let's say everything, as I told you at the beginning, everything that can give you some idea, some inspiration is good. Sometimes could be a bit overwhelming because we would like to have time to do, everything, to read, to watch movies, to travel, to go to exhibition. And you don't have so much time, of course. So it could be frustrating.
Yeah.
do you think about the Raf and Miu partnership? Well, I like it. I think, well, you know, before that, there were a few seasons in which Miuccia was not criticized, but they were saying she was kind of repeating same things, or trying to do something, but not really, the change was not really happening. So I was also happy and curious to see, and I think is giving new, something new to the brand from what I know. See, a new air, exactly. Also, some of my friends and ex-colleagues working there are saying that it's good, you know, when you work for a long time in a brand, you need some fresh air and some new inputs, even to change a bit the way of working. So I also like a lot Raf Simons himself, the brands he worked with. Sometimes because he's considered as Miuccia, they have something in common that is very similar, that is this cultural aspect. They really love art, you know, to have a very conceptual approach to their collection. So their topics are often connected with something intellectual, let's say. So in this, they are very similar. They have a common interests. So I think they have very stimulating conversation and exchanging. That's what Miuccia really likes in her collaborator. So the last collection they did together, I think they were sellable, probably, for sure. Yes.
And then what would be a tip you could give to a beginner designer?
Well, when you begin, whether, let's say, if you work for someone else or you work, it's always recommended to work before for someone else, because you can understand.
Not your money.
Don't risk anything. Work for someone. Try to steal and understand as much as you can, and then, in case in future, do your own thing. I will say listen. I mean, really pay attention, be attentive in a way to understand the interaction between people. But probably the most difficult thing to learn when you work is to understand what they want from you. This is in any job. Like when you get a brief from your boss or from your coordinator and they ask you, I need you to do this. In case, ask questions and make sure that you got what they want from you, because in this way you will save time. Nothing happens if you make a mistake, especially at the beginning. They try to help you to learn and to let you grow in a company and learn the job. But sometimes it's also our fault, because we tend to be quick, and maybe we don't want to show that we didn't get completely everything. So we don't ask questions and we just go back to execution. Then we have completely missed the point. So my suggestion when you start is to carefully listen. Don't be worried to ask questions. In case when you do something, ask for confirmation if you are going in the right direction, because this will save time. If you go till the end with a completely wrong thing, then you have to do everything from the beginning. That anyway in fashion happens all the time, but at least you probably have saved time. This also with the clients. If you have a client that is not with you in the office, is far, it gives a brief online, make sure to have all the questions, all the answers cleared, and then you go on with the things you have to do. So
very good tip. Here on the chat we have another one. What are some tips that you can share with us to keep creativity flowing?
Let's say that's a good question, because it's not always let's say creativity is not always there, especially when we need it. Not necessarily we find it ready to be used. And I guess also after this year and a half, we have been challenged a lot in order to maintain our creativity and energies, high. So my suggestion, I tell you what works for me, because we are all different. So when I am stuck and I cannot go on with my work, I tend to have a break, really, because sometimes you have to create, let's say, some new space in your brain to let something new enter. And in my specific case, it could be just to simply have a walk and detox for a second from internet, social media, computer, emails, and everything. Or it could, in my case, could become a real run at the park, something that stress my body more than my mind, and so my mind can in some way refresh, and then when I go back to work, I feel more relaxed. Maybe the pressure is a bit gone, so I can focus more and have something. And then, as you mentioned, anyway, usually art is something that gives me a lot of ideas. As music, I cannot work without having loud music in my ears. Of course, when you're in an office, it's not always possible because you look alienated, so you have to stay with your colleagues and discuss with them. But when it comes to just sit down and sketch, usually when I really listen to music, I can go faster and maintain a focus that lasts for hours with no distraction, let's say. And really, because our phone and computer may just become a distraction when it comes to focus on something. So in this case, another tip I usually apply to myself is to create sessions of work that are not too long in order not to esaurire, how you say, expire completely my creativity, but to divide it in moments so I can use it more times during the day or during the week. I remember once reading, maybe the Japanese writer Murakami.
Yes.
He's also a runner, and once I read something he wrote that made me think, because he said to write, so be a writer. He says to be a runner, you cannot write every day a marathon. You have to put a schedule and decide, like you do an office work, like today I will write for 4 hours, then stop, then other 3 hours, then stop, or you schedule anyway. And I think design is the same, not necessarily. Like something is, if you do it for yourself, you are still a student. But when you work in an office, it's impossible to be creative
8 hours a day.
Yes, 7 days a week. So you need to alternate with some other tasks. And luckily in an office, you have so many things to do that you do that. So it's a good way to organize your time, to break the creative moment with something more schematic that you don't really have to think about, so you recharge your creativity battery. Let's say.
Nice. All right, I think this is pretty much it. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Giulia. This was very, very interesting. Hopefully we'll be able to do this more often now with all the technology and the current situation. Just so you know, Giulia,
I hope so.
We signed an agreement with CEDIM, and now the students are going to be able to go and study with us for a semester. So I think it's going to be very valuable. This is one of the most important design and fashion schools in Mexico. So hopefully we will be able to host them in Marangoni in our different campuses.
Yes, thank you guys for joining and listening and asking questions. In case you will ever come to Milan, and especially to attend this semester, probably also we're going to meet because I teach in that course in the English classes. So in case you come, let me know so I know you were there today. Otherwise, anyway, I wish you my best for everything about your study course and everything else. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jaciel, and thank you to all the students who attended, and let's keep in touch and let us know whatever you need. Jaciel and Diana Villalobos, they have my contact. So any questions, you can always channel them through me, okay?
Thank you so much, Giulia and Cesar.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Ciao, 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 ciao.